Hi, I'm Carmine Gallo. I'm here with legendary CEO of Cisco, John Chambers. John ran Cisco for 20 plus years. And we're here to talk about his new book, Connecting the Dots, Lessons for Leadership in a Startup World. John, hello. Thank you so much.
It's good to see you.
Great to see you.
We share a common passion on communications.
We absolutely do. You connected the dots for me personally years ago when I was making the transition from journalism to writing about communication and working with leaders. I went to a keynote that you delivered at a technology conference, and I'll never forget my first reaction before you came out was, Cisco? Doesn't Cisco make routers? That's the metal that directs data packets around the internet. And I thought, frankly, don't take it personally, this is going to
be boring.
This is going to be dry.
Yeah, ones and zeros.
And then John comes out, you come out, and you captivate the crowd, and you're walking among the audience, and for 1 hour you hold us riveted with no notes, and that's when I realized, oh, wait a minute. He's not talking about routers and switches. He's talking about a better world. 9 books later, I'm still learning from you. So thank you for your inspiration.
Carmine, you've been very kind. I think we learn from each other, and I think one of the great things about leaders, of which we've both been very successful, is you're constantly learning and you have that curiosity. And then when you get something that really finds fascinating, you kind of like to open it up, like you open up a can and look to see what's inside and what you can learn from it. So this will be fun.
If you stop learning, you stop growing. You seem to have that growth mindset.
Shimon Peres, he thought about that, the prior president of Israel, very good friend for 17 years. But he said, John, you never want to stop learning. You never want to stop questioning. And you're about to get 2 daughters who are going to be teenagers. He said, think like a teenager. So you're going to have that resource available to you.
Well, I learned a tremendous amount. I write about communication. I've been studying it for 20 years, and yet I learned a tremendous amount in this book. So I'm fascinated by it. Here's some amazing statistics. I want our viewers to listen to these stats. Cisco, during your 20 years as CEO, you survived 5 major downturns and thrived. You went from 400 employees to 70,000. You increased sales from 70 million to 47 billion a year. And this is amazing. Your stock turned 10,000 employees into millionaires. That's astounding.
Well, that's kind of the score of a ball game at the end. What it really says is how well did you build organizations? How well did you communicate to the key constituencies? How well did you take the opportunities that were given to you, and how did you ride that crest or not in the process?
And here's one of the reasons for your success, according to your book. We didn't become obsessed with selling routers and switches. Instead, Cisco set out to change the world. I drive this home with leaders all the time. If you want to be successful, whether it's a company or as an individual in your career, you've got to get clear on your vision and communicate it consistently.
And you've got to communicate it in the way that your audience understands. I've had the chance to listen to a lot of great communicators, both political leaders, business leaders, entertainment leaders, etc. Most of them have a common characteristics of understanding what their audience have interest in, and then how do you be able to articulate your views in a way that they walk away with it. President Clinton did an amazing job of that. He always broke his questions into 3 pieces. One time here at an event at Steve Jobs' house where we were all lined up to convince him he needed to support us on a key tech issue. And it's rare that you get CEOs in the Valley really lined up, especially Steve and others at that point in time. And we were all organized on it. And rather than come to this meeting and be viewed that we pressured him to do this, he announced ahead of time that he was supportive of our position. He walked in, poured a glass of wine, and I said, now what do you want to talk about? And so what I want to talk about is how did I learn from him? And I said, how do you do so well in your questions? And he always breaks them into 3 pieces. Then I said, all right, tell us what we did wrong in this issue. And he basically said, you were communicating a very complex message, almost with religious zealots behind it. And your issue, you forget who you're talking with. You've got to admit that your competitors have different points of view. You've got to say they have some merits, but here's why our view is better. Then you've got to express it in a way that your audience gets it. If you're appealing to California voters, which we clearly were, we were talking what would this mean to them in terms of jobs being created, in terms of their incomes, in terms of technology leadership. And you have to make complex topics easy for all of us to understand, including the leaders.
You talked about Bill Clinton as being an exceptional communicator, and so
Amazing.
that was one of the things he did. He would take a question and break it up into three.
Yes.
Yeah. So to me, this is fascinating because you, even at your stage, you're constantly learning to be a better communicator.
Always.
You're learning to be a better speaker.
And you learn from everyone you interface to.
We could talk about overcoming adversity now because you're very open about the challenges that you faced in the past. You talk about your fear of public speaking. I think that's wonderful. Warren Buffett had a fear of public speaking. Barbara Corcoran did. Richard Branson did. It's okay because socially, it's in our DNA to be accepted by people. So it's a natural fear.
It might be natural for some. For me, it was really hard to get over.
Was it? Yes. But you overcame that and you became known as a great speaker. Here's the question. Can anybody get better at public speaking?
I think everybody can get a lot better at public speaking. Break it into two pieces, just to give your audience an idea. I got so scared originally because I was dyslexic.
Yes.
And if you read from a speech, you lost your point. And if you tried to memorize it, it got even worse. But I finally learned how to just picture the whole thing and be able to speak to an audience like we're having a conversation. To your point, maybe even for an hour long without the notes, but clearly outlined in my mind in terms of what I wanted to do. And I took what was my weakness, not just on fear of public speaking, but because I was dyslexic, I could not read well. I inverted letters. I've learned how to communicate in a different way and really connect with people. I feed off the audience. I look straight in their eyes and build off it. I can see when I connect or not on it. And then I try to take a logical process, almost writing a press release before you make your first move of what I want the speech or the discussion to end up with, what would be my ideal outcome, and then say, how do I really connect with the audience in a way that gets us there?
You mentioned dyslexia, and that's another challenge that you had to overcome or manage, I guess, because you don't really...
You never overcome it, you learn how to manage it.
I love the fact that you're open about the challenges that you've had with dyslexia. I have ADHD. I've diagnosed ADHD, and I love hearing stories of successful people who have overcome that, because now I know, hey, wait a minute, ADHD are some of the most successful creative people in the world. So it empowers you. Tell us about that, the event where you first realized that your own personal narrative can have an impact on people.
Well, I never intended to ever share that I had that learning disability. I viewed it as a weakness, and often I had a vision that people want the CEOs, especially if you're leading the charge and trying to become the most valuable company in the world and take on all your competitors and beat them. You want them to almost be unbeatable, if you will, without weaknesses. And I clearly have weaknesses, as all of us do in our life, but I did not intend to ever share it. And at a Take Our Children to Work day with about 500 people in the audience, a young girl came up and was asking the question as each of the kids would come up and ask, and she couldn't get the question out, and she broke down and started to cry and turned and left. And so I followed her off the stage and stopped her partway back, and I said, let's try that again. And she said, I'm dyslexic, I have trouble asking questions. And I said, I am too. And I said, here's how you can deal with this, and don't try to memorize a question, just picture it as a conversation with a family friend, and here's how you get through it, and it will surprise you. Your parents will always tell you you're smart, but you expect that from parents.
Yeah.
Most dyslexics have well above average IQ, so you've just got to learn how to put it to work. So I had her ask the question, and as I started to get up to go get my microphone, I realized I had a lavalier mic on. So I disclosed to 500 people that I had a learning disability, and I thought maybe I went way too far. That evening, I got a bunch of notes, some emails, phone calls, etc., saying, John, I connected more with you in this session than I ever had before. I've always believed in your strategy, your vision, etc., but you connected at a personal level in a way that changed that little girl and changed others. And then it would also surprise you how many in the room were dyslexic themselves or had children. So I think sharing our challenges in life, because all of us have it, and sharing our fears, My hands sweat to this day when I talk about dyslexia. I don't know
No
if yours
kidding.
do, but they
No
do
kidding.
there.
Really?
I can
Wow.
get in front of 10,000 people with the President of the United States beside me, my hands don't sweat.
Yeah.
But just talking about dyslexia, because as you read in school, the kids would laugh when you couldn't read well.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't think I've ever raised my voice, ever. I have high expectations of my team, but I've never yelled. And secondly, I treat people like I'd like to be treated. I never kid people in perhaps a way that cuts them down.
You have a reputation as being one of the nice guys in Silicon Valley.
Well, I hope not too nice, because I want him to be concerned about me as a competitor. But, but no, thank you.
Well, I am glad that you talked about that adversity. I recall speaking to Richard Branson earlier this year, and he's very open.
Yes, he is.
He's an open book. Talks about his dyslexia,
But you know,
talks
all
about
of
the
us-
failures.
Chuck Schwab the same way.
Yeah.
Part of the reason we were open is a person was writing an article about dyslexia, about leaders, and I think all three of us were going to pass on it. And she then said, the reason I'm writing is my daughter is dyslexic, and you make a difference in their lives.
you
So all
absolutely
three of us did. I think we all started talking about it very similar times. And it is amazing how many leaders actually are dyslexic, to your point, because it causes you to think differently. And if you ever watch two dyslexics on a stage, they can actually finish each other's sentences, even they might not have met, because you understand how they think.
It's through those stories, I think, of leaders who struggle and overcome hardship that we become, the listener becomes a better version of themselves.
I think you perhaps learn more. It is, as I said in the book, it's a lot more fun talking about your accomplishments rather than your setbacks.
Right.
But to your point, I think the currencies of leaders today, and it's very important for your viewership not to lose track of this, leaders are all about trust, they're all about track record, and they're all about relationships. And those three variables determine how good of a leader you are and how well you can communicate the elements of it.
Let's talk about communication skills. It's a key theme throughout your book.
All right.
The quote you have is fascinating to me. I think it's very important for everybody to understand. Communication is one of the most important skills that a leader, and frankly, most employees now need to excel on the job. You go further, and you say that communication is more important today for a leader, for an employee, than it was 20 years ago. Why?
Dramatically more important. Let's use one of the great icons of American business, Jack Welch. Great on vision and strategy, awesome about developing people. Crotonville is famous for developing their leaders, and very, very firm on corporate culture. But communications was not something he put big emphasis on, nor was he early on in the career a great speaker. And he was the best leader. In today's world, however, when you've got to deal with social media, you've got to deal with a dramatically different speed of events. You've got to be able to talk to your shareholders, your employees, your customers, and your partners all in the same way, and often with just an hour's notice on a very important topic. If you don't have the communication skills, you're not going to be as effective leader. So with the 16 startups that I'm personally invested in, I focus huge on communications and culture. And then at Cisco, I literally focused on how well could all of us speak. And after every session, including this one, I'll get feedback from you and from my team about what could I do better. And I literally rank people on how they do in the communications, including myself, and have the customers rank us to see how effective we are.
How did you teach or help your leaders and managers develop their public speaking and presentation skills?
Well, the
at
reason I'm
Cisco,
slowing in part is I used a combination of two things. I think you have to lead by an example as a leader, and you have to share with people why it's very important. And then basically I measured them and I put them in competition. And I'd rank them at the end of every quarter, how many customer visits did they participate in. On a scale of 1 to 5, what did the customers say their communication skills were and their relevance, etc. And I always led with myself. I will, after every session, get a review. I also work before every quarter conference call with a communications coach to say, what am I communicating well or not? And then learning how to adjust to the different audiences. So to answer your question, it was an example of lead by example and culture, but also command and control. Here's what we're going to do, and here's how you versus your peers.
But what a great example of the fact that communication and persuasion is more important today than ever before. People don't understand that when I write about it too, because they think, well, it's automation, we're in a digital economy, it's AI. No, the human factor is more important today than ever.
How a company, and we've seen examples of that in Silicon Valley in the last 6 months, which I wrote about in my book before they even occurred, how important important is it when a company has a crisis or an opportunity, how they respond initially and what are their initial reactions, and then how they view with their communication skills shapes the narrative, not for the next 6 months, for the next 5 to 10 years. And if you do it right, you navigate through it. If you miss, you have the problem.
Let's talk about simple communication. You
Right.
write that capturing complex concepts and expressing them in simple, easy to understand terms has tremendous power. You talk about the time at Cisco when you quit talking about the company as a manufacturer of routers, and you talked about the company as an organization that would change the world. So what was the line that you coined?
Well, it was both a communication skills, but more importantly, it was a dramatic change in strategy, both for Cisco and for the Valley. We basically moved from selling routers, a very complex, really complex product, and then moving to, quote, selling switches, an equally as complex product, to saying how do these products, what is the outcome? So don't fall in love with your products, fall in love with the outcome that you want your customers to get. And we said it's going to change the way the world works, lives, learns, and plays.
That's right.
My marketing team even hated it. And my engineers said, John, we don't build architectures, we build products. But I said, this is the way we're going to go, because I felt the internet would change that. And if Cisco did it right, we'd break away from all of our peers with the value we brought to our customers.
And it was that mission that the internet will change the way we work, live, play, and learn.
Yes.
Right. That it was that mission that carried you through those 5 downturns.
Well,
you got to get clear on the mission. I'm not sure how many times I have to say this.
Well, you've got to get clear on the mission.
And communicate it consistently.
And then you've got to be very realistic when there are downturns. What caused the downturn? How much was self-inflicted? How much of it was a market phenomena? You've got to get clear on how deep it's going to be, how long it will last, and then you've got to paint the picture of what we look like coming out. Sounds very simple, but that's what communications are. If they're going to work, they have to be simple to understand. It can't be complex sentences that nobody's going to remember. And literally on corporate values, I put them on people's belts, because even my top executives couldn't remember the 6 top corporate values. I said, put it on the belt. When in doubt, be able to do this. And that's where communications becomes fun. When one of your employees halfway around the world in front of 5,000 of his peers asks the question, John, isn't our culture different in India versus the US? And I came all the way off stage, went to the back with the cameras following me, sat down, put my arm around him. This was fun for me. I'm not so sure it was for him. Pulled out, and I said, let's see your badge. And he pulled out his badge, and I said, make innovation happen. Is that unique to India? No. Put customers first. Is that unique to India? No. Treat others like you'd like to be treated yourself. Is that unique to India? No. Just do the right thing. Boom. Change the way the world works, lives, and plays. And the point was that communications, keeping it simple and tight, made all the difference. And then how do you communicate that in a negative way, but at least for me was fun, and in a way people will remember?
Why do you walk into the audience when
I
you
feed
give
off of energy. And
You have no notes, you're not standing behind a lectern, and you're walking in the audience for an hour. How do you do that?
Well, it's what you said earlier. To be an effective communicator, the better you can connect with your audience, and the more they can feel, even if there's 10,000 of them, that it's one-on-one communications. The more you don't have a podium in front of you, they don't see you reading a speech that anybody could have written. They don't know if you did it or somebody else did it, and you're just a good actor of the speech. But when you come out in the audience and you look them in the eye and you look right at them and say, here's the point I'm making, you can feed off the energy, you can see if they agree or disagree, and you can make everyone feel like you're talking to them specifically. It also makes me relaxed. And when you're dyslexic, I can talk a lot more effectively when I'm relaxed. Many people, when they get nervous, talk fast. I'm the reverse. When I'm relaxed and I'm on a topic I love, I'm off to the races. And even my wife, who's a speech therapist and calls me her only failure, she can't fix that energy level that is there. But the audience allows me to connect in a different way. It allows me to really be different than our peers, and you're trying to be in a positive way, and it's a trust that builds up.
Finally, I do have to ask you about building relationships.
Okay.
Because I look around and you have so many letters we can look at later from world leaders. You have a reputation of building strong friendships and relationships with people and prime ministers and presidents on opposing sides of politics and business. And yet you're friends with them, you admire them, and you talk in very positive terms about them. So I'm curious about building relationships in a time of divisiveness. There's a lot of hate, there's a lot of divisiveness. People stereotype entire groups. Here's the question. Is it possible, speaking to a great relationship expert like yourself, can you disagree and still be friends?
Oh, I think that only is not possible. If we don't learn how to do that, we've got a problem as a nation and a problem as a company if you've got that in the company and otherwise. At a company level, if you're not able to have very healthy give and take, I call it constructive friction, then you're not going to arrive at the right decision. You've got to lead by example. Secondly, if people make it personal, that violates the code at Cisco, and it violates the code for my companies that I'm coaching. It's fine to disagree, but you never make it personal and you never make it about the other person. And the day you're not willing to accept challenges, you can't be a leader, at least not for the companies I work with. When you think about it, I get along with the Democrats and the Republicans very well. I get along with Nancy Pelosi very well and Kevin McCarthy very well. I got along with John McCain prior to his passing, who was a very, very good friend. I was one of his 5 national co-chairs, and Chuck Schumer. When I went back to West Virginia University and started to talk about a startup state, we had the governor, the president of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, our 2 great senators, one a Democrat, Joe Manchin, one a great Republican, Shelley Moore Capito. We all came together with a common vision. And so I think this is what leadership's about. It's not one of dividing groups. And candidly, I learned a long time ago in business or in sports, if I could divide the other team, I had them. And so I believe leadership is about bringing us together. It's about playing for a higher purpose. And it's about creating an environment where people like the healthy give and take. However, once a decision is made, we have to understand we all support it as though it was our decision. It was one of the reasons my turnover ran so low at Cisco. In Valley, that averages just outside the window here, turnover probably in the 12 to 15% range. We ran 5% for 20-some years. And acquired companies, which normally runs, 20% after you acquire a company for the next 5 years, average attrition, voluntary, we ran 4%. And we created that culture of we like diversity, diverse teams work better together. We had 30% of our board being female before even people were talking the concept, 20 years ago. And we didn't do it for diversity's sake, although that's the right thing to do. We did it just because the company runs better. It's the right thing to do, and it's representative of our customers and our employee base. And so often just doing the right thing is also really good for business. Sometimes in today's world, there's pressure, especially from the communication side, to focus on this quarter, this moment. I think it's more important to focus on what you're really going to do in society and what are your goals and aspirations, and get everybody focused on the same end element. And you can also be the most profitable company in your market by far if you do the job well.
That's fascinating. Well, you're a great role model. And thank
Sometimes I have weaknesses like all of us. My wife could list them.
And thank you for inspiring the next generation of leaders. John, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.